The Life Divine by Sri Aurobindo.
Chapter 16. The Triple Status of Supermind. Myself is that which supports all beings and constitutes their existence. I am the self which abides within all beings. Gita. 3 powers of light uphold 3 luminous worlds divine. Rig Veda. Before we pass to this easier understanding of the world we inhabit, from the standpoint of an apprehending truth consciousness, which sees things as would an individual soul freed from the limitations of mentality and admitted to participate in the action of the divine supermind, we must pause and resume briefly what we have realized or can yet realize of the consciousness of the Lord, the Ishvara, as He develops the world by His Maya out of the original concentrated unity of His being. We have started with the assertion of all existence as one being, whose essential nature is consciousness. One consciousness whose active nature is force or will, and this being is delight. This consciousness is delight. This force or will is delight. Eternal and inalienable bliss of existence, bliss of consciousness, bliss of force or will, whether concentrated in itself and at rest, or active and creative. This is God, and this is ourselves in our essential, our non-phenomenal being. Concentrated in itself, it possesses, or rather is, the essential, eternal, inalienable bliss. Active and creative, it possesses, or rather becomes, the delight of the play of existence, the play of consciousness, the play of force and will. That play is the universe, and that delight is the sole cause, motive, and object of cosmic existence. The divine consciousness possesses that play and delight eternally and inalienably. Our essential being our real self, which is concealed from us by the false self or mental ego, also enjoys that play and delight eternally and inalienably, and cannot indeed do otherwise, since it is one in being with the divine consciousness. If we aspire, therefore, to a divine life, we cannot attain to it by any other way than by unveiling this veiled self in us, by mounting from our present status in the false self or mental ego to a higher status in the true self, the Atman. By entering into that unity with the divine consciousness, which something superconscient in us always enjoys. Otherwise we could not exist, but which our conscious mentality has forfeited. But when we thus assert this unity of Satchidananda on the one hand, and this divided mentality on the other, we posit two opposite entities, one of which must be false if the other is to be held as true, one of which must be abolished if the other is to be enjoyed. Yet it is in the mind and its form of life and body that we exist on earth. And if we must abolish the consciousness of mind, life and body in order to reach the one existence, consciousness and bliss, then a divine life here is impossible. We must abandon cosmic existence utterly as an illusion in order to enjoy or re-become the transcendent. From this solution there is no escape unless there be an intermediate link between the two, which can explain them to each other and establish between them such a relation as will make it possible for us to realize the one existence, consciousness, delight in the mold of the mind, life and body. The intermediate link exists. We call it the Supermind or the truth consciousness, because it is a principle superior to mentality and exists, acts and proceeds in the fundamental truth and unity of things, and not like the mind in their appearances and phenomenal divisions. The existence of the Supermind is a logical necessity, arising directly from the position with which we have started. For in itself, Satchidananda must be a spaceless and timeless absolute of conscious existence that is bliss. But the world is, on the contrary, an extension in time and space, and a movement, a working out a development of relations and possibilities by causality, or what so appears to us, in time and space. The true name of this causality is divine law. And the essence of that law is an inevitable self-development of the truth of the thing that is as idea in the very essence of what is developed. It is a previously fixed determination of relative movements out of the stuff of infinite possibility. That which thus develops all things must be a knowledge will or conscious force. For all manifestation of universe is a play of the conscious force which is the essential nature of existence. But the developing knowledge will cannot be mental, for mind does not know, possess, or govern this law, but is governed by it, is one of its results, moves in the phenomena of the self-development and not at its root, observes as divided things the results of the development, and strives in vain to arrive at their source and reality. Moreover, this knowledge will, which develops all, must be in possession of the unity of things, and must out of it manifest their multiplicity. But mind is not in possession of that unity. It has only an imperfect possession of a part of the multiplicity. Therefore, there must be a principle superior to the mind, which satisfies the conditions in which mind fails. No doubt, it is Satchidananda itself that is this principle. But Satchidananda not resting in its pure, infinite, invariable consciousness, but proceeding out of this primal poise, or rather upon it as a base and in it as a continent, into a movement which is its form of energy and instrument of cosmic creation. Consciousness and force are the twin essential aspects of the pure power of existence. Knowledge and will must therefore be the form which that power takes in creating a world of relations in the extension of time and space. This knowledge and this will must be one, infinite, all-embracing, all-possessing, all-forming, holding eternally in itself that which it casts into movement and form, The supermind then is being moving out into a determinative self-knowledge which perceives certain truths of itself and wills to realize them in a temporal and spatial extension of its own timeless and spaceless existence. Whatever is in its own being takes form as self-knowledge, as truth consciousness, as real idea. And that self-knowledge being also self-force fulfills or realizes itself inevitably in time and space. This then is the nature of the divine consciousness, which creates in itself all things by a movement of its conscious force, and governs their development through a self-evolution by inherent knowledge will of the truth of existence or real idea which has formed them. The being that is thus conscient is what we call God. And he must obviously be omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. Omnipresent, for all forms are forms of his conscious being, created by its force of movement in its own extension as space and time. Omniscient, for all things exist in his conscious being, are formed by it and possessed by it. Omnipotent, for this all-possessing consciousness is also an all-possessing force and all-informing will. And this will and knowledge are not at war with each other as our will and knowledge are capable of being at war with each other, because they are not different, but are one movement of the same being. Nor can they be contradicted by any other will, force, or consciousness from outside or within, for there is no consciousness or force external to the one. And all energies and formations of knowledge within are not other than it, but are merely play of the one all-determining will and the one all-harmonizing knowledge. What we see as a clash of wills and forces, because we dwell in the particular and divided and cannot see the whole, the supermind envisages as the conspiring elements of a predetermined harmony which is always present to it, because the totality of things is eternally subject to its gaze. whatever be the poise or form its action takes, this will always be the nature of the divine consciousness. But its existence being absolute in itself, its power of existence is also absolute in its extension, and is not therefore limited to one poise or one form of action. We, human beings, are phenomenally a particular form of consciousness, subject to time and space, and can only be in our surface consciousness, which is all we know of ourselves, one thing at a time, one formation, one poise of being, one aggregate of experience. And that one thing is for us the truth of ourselves which we acknowledge. All the rest is either not true or no longer true, because it has disappeared into the past out of our ken, or not yet true, because it is waiting in the future and not yet in our ken. But the divine consciousness is not so particularized, nor so limited. It can be many things at a time, and take more than one enduring poise, even for all time. We find that in the principle of Supermind itself, it has three such general poises or sessions of its world-founding consciousness. The first founds the inalienable unity of things. The second modifies that unity so as to support the manifestation of the many in one and one in many. The third further modifies it so as to support the evolution of a diversified individuality, which, by the action of ignorance, becomes in us at a lower level the illusion of the separate ego. We have seen what is the nature of this first and primary poise of the Supermind, which founds the inalienable unity of things. It is not the pure Unitarian consciousness, for that is a timeless and spaceless concentration of Satchidananda in itself, in which conscious force does not cast itself out into any kind of extension, and if it contains the universe at all, contains it in eternal potentiality and not in temporal actuality. This, on the contrary, is an equal self-extension of Satchidananda, all comprehending, all possessing, all constituting. But this all is one, not many. There is no individualization. It is when the reflection of this Supermind falls upon our stilled and purified self, that we lose all sense of individuality. For there is no concentration of consciousness there to support an individual development. All is developed in unity and as one. All is held by this divine consciousness as forms of its existence, not as in any degree separate existences. Somewhat as the thoughts and images that occur in our mind are not separate existences to us, but forms taken by our consciousness, so are all names and forms to this primary supermind. It is the pure divine ideation and formation in the infinite. Only an ideation and formation that is organized not as an unreal play of mental thought, but as a real play of conscious being. The divine soul in this poise would make no difference between conscious soul and force soul, for all force would be action of consciousness, nor between matter and spirit, since all mold would be simply form of spirit. In the second poise of the supermind, the divine consciousness stands back in the idea from the movement which it contains, realizing it by a sort of apprehending consciousness, following it, occupying and inhabiting its works, seeming to distribute itself in its forms. In each name and form, it would realize itself as the stable, conscious self, the same in all. But also, it would realize itself as a concentration of conscious self, following and supporting the individual play of movement, and upholding its differentiation from other play of movement, the same everywhere in soul essence, but varying in soul form. This concentration supporting the soul form would be the individual divine, or Jivatman, as distinguished from the universal divine, or one, all-constituting self. There would be no essential difference, but only a practical differentiation for the play, which would not abrogate the real unity. The universal divine would know all soul forms as itself, and yet establish a different relation with each separately, and in each with all the others. The individual divine would envisage its existence as a soul form and soul movement of the One. And while by the comprehending action of consciousness it would enjoy its unity with the One and with all soul forms, it would also, by a forward or frontal apprehending action, support and enjoy its individual movement and its relations of a free difference in unity, both with the One and with all its forms. If our purified mind were to reflect this secondary poise of Supermind, our soul could support and occupy its individual existence, and yet, even there, realize itself as the One that has become all, inhabits all, contains all, enjoying even in its particular modification its unity with God and its fellows. In no other circumstance of the supramental existence would there be any characteristic change. The only change would be this play of the One that has manifested its multiplicity, and of the many that are still one, with all that is necessary to maintain and conduct the play. A third poise of the Supermind would be attained if the supporting concentration were no longer to stand at the back, as it were, of the movement, inhabiting it with a certain superiority to it, and so following and enjoying, but were to project itself into the movement and to be, in a way, involved in it. Here, the character of the play would be altered, but only insofar as the individual divine would so predominantly make the play of relations with the universal and with its other forms the practical field of its conscious experience, that the realization of utter unity with them would be only a supreme accompaniment and constant culmination of all experience. But in the higher poise, unity would be the dominant and fundamental experience, and variation would be only a play of the unity. This tertiary poise would be, therefore, that of a sort of fundamental, blissful dualism in unity. No longer unity qualified by a subordinate dualism between the individual divine and its universal source, with all the consequences that would accrue from the maintenance and operation of such a dualism. It may be said that the first consequence would be a lapse into the ignorance of avidya, which takes the many for the real fact of existence and views the one only as a cosmic sum of the many. But there would not necessarily be any such lapse. For the individual divine would still be conscious of itself as the result of the one and of its power of conscious self-creation. That is to say, of its multiple self-centration, conceived so as to govern and enjoy manifoldly its manifold existence in the extension of time and space. This true spiritual individual would not arrogate to itself an independent or separate existence. It would only affirm the truth of the differentiating movement along with the truth of the stable unity, regarding them as the upper and lower poles of the same truth, the foundation and culmination of the same divine play. And it would insist on the joy of the differentiation as necessary to the fullness of the joy of the unity. Obviously, these three poises would be only different ways of dealing with the same truth. The truth of existence enjoyed would be the same. The way of enjoying it, or rather the poise of the soul in enjoying it, would be different. The delight, the ananda would vary, but would abide always within the status of the truth consciousness, and involve no lapse into the falsehood and the ignorance. For the secondary and tertiary supermind would only develop and apply in the terms of the divine multiplicity what the primary supermind had held in the terms of the divine unity. We cannot stamp any of these three poises with the stigma of falsehood and illusion. The language of the Upanishads, the supreme ancient authority for these truths of a higher experience, when they speak of the divine existence which is manifesting itself, implies the validity of all these experiences. We can only assert the priority of the oneness to the multiplicity. A priority not in time, but in relation of consciousness. And no statement of supreme spiritual experience, no Vedantic philosophy denies this priority, or the eternal dependence of the many on the one. It is because in time the many seem not to be eternal, but to manifest out of the one and return into it as their essence, that their reality is denied. But it might equally be reasoned that the eternal persistence, or if you will, the eternal recurrence of the manifestation in time, is a proof that the divine multiplicity is an eternal fact of the supreme beyond time, no less than the divine unity. Otherwise it could not have this characteristic of inevitable eternal recurrence in time. It is indeed only when our human mentality lays an exclusive emphasis on one side of spiritual experience, affirms that to be the sole eternal truth, and states it in the terms of our all-dividing mental logic, that the necessity for mutually destructive schools of philosophy arises. Thus, emphasizing the sole truth of the Unitarian consciousness, we observe the play of the divine unity erroneously rendered by our mentality into the terms of real difference. But not satisfied with correcting this error of the mind by the truth of a higher principle, we assert that the play itself is an illusion. Or, emphasizing the play of the one in the many, we declare a qualified unity and regard the individual soul as a sole form of the Supreme, but would assert the eternity of this qualified existence and deny altogether the experience of a pure consciousness in an unqualified oneness. Or again, emphasizing the play of difference, we assert that the Supreme and the human soul are eternally different, and reject the validity of an experience which exceeds and seems to abolish that difference. But the position that we have now firmly taken absolves us from the necessity of these negations and exclusions. We see that there is a truth behind all these affirmations, but at the same time an excess which leads to an ill-founded negation. Affirming, as we have done, the absoluteness of that, not limited by our ideas of unity, not limited by our ideas of multiplicity. Affirming the unity as a basis for the manifestation of the multiplicity, and the multiplicity as the basis for the return to oneness and the enjoyment of unity in the divine manifestation. We need not burden our present statement with these discussions, or undertake the vain labor of enslaving to our mental distinctions and definitions the absolute freedom of the divine infinite.